I actually didn't believe what I was being told. A friend of mine was at Birkenhead on the 14th of January when Archie did his deep dive between Meghan's knees.
Something just shifted. After years of silence, after years of dismissed theories, internet speculation, and whispered conversations behind closed palace doors, the ground is finally moving beneath Meghan Markle's feet. And this time, it is not a blogger. It is not a Twitter thread. It is not an anonymous comment buried in a forum at 2 a.m. This time, a high-level palace courtier has stepped forward and spoken directly to the mainstream media. And what they said is sending shockwaves through royal circles from London to Los Angeles. Stay with me, because this story, and I mean every layer of it, is about to get a lot bigger than you think. There are details buried in what's emerging right now that the mainstream press has barely touched. Details that, once you hear them, are going to make you ask questions you cannot unask. So let's get into it. From the very beginning, because context is everything here. The scandal enters the mainstream. For years, the surrogacy question surrounding Meghan Markle's pregnancies has lived almost exclusively in the shadows, in comment sections, on independent YouTube channels, in the private conversations of people who were dismissed as conspiracy theorists the moment they dared to raise their hand. But here is the thing about questions that refuse to go away. They don't disappear just because powerful people want them to. They simmer, they build pressure, and eventually, pressure finds a crack. That crack just appeared in the form of Radar Online, one of the few mainstream American media outlets that has been willing, consistently and courageously, to report on Harry and Meghan without the protective filter of Sussex PR. And the story Radar Online just dropped is extraordinary. According to the publication, Buckingham Palace is now facing mounting pressure to remove Prince Archie and Princess Lilibet from the UK's royal line of succession, unless and until Meghan Markle provides absolute, irrefutable proof that she gave birth to both children herself. Read that again. Let it settle. We are not talking about a fringe website. We are not talking about anonymous social media accounts. Radar Online is quoting a high-level palace courtier, a source with direct access to the inner workings of the royal family, someone who knows things. And here is exactly what that courtier told Radar Online. And I want to read this carefully because every word matters. This scandal comes as no surprise. Speculation about the children has been simmering for years. The kids are 6th and 7th in line to the throne, but have been under cloak and dagger secrecy since they were born. There are so many questions swirling around them. This crisis won't die down until the irrefutable truth comes out. Cloak and dagger secrecy. This crisis won't die down until the irrefutable truth comes out. These are not the words of someone brushing this aside. These are not the words of a palace insider rolling their eyes at internet rumor mongers. This is someone using the language of institutional urgency. Someone saying, this is a real problem and it is not going away. Now ask yourself this, and I genuinely want you to think about it. Why would a palace courtier, a person whose entire professional existence depends on discretion, go on record with a publication like this? What would possess someone at that level to break ranks? Because people in those positions do not speak carelessly. They do not speak accidentally. When a palace insider talks, there is always a reason. So what is the reason here? We are going to come back to that. But first, we need to understand how we got to this point, and who has been telling this story long before it was mainstream. Lady Colin Campbell, the voice in the wilderness. There is one name that keeps appearing every time this subject surfaces. One author, one commentator, one figure who was raising these questions, publicly on the record with her reputation on the line, years before anyone else dared to. Lady Colin Campbell, royal author, biographer, a woman with decades of experience navigating the complex, treacherous waters of royal reporting, and notably, a woman who has been quoted directly by Radar Online in this very story as someone who has been actively challenging the conspiracy of silence and misinformation surrounding both Todds. Lady C has been remarkably candid about when and how she first encountered this story. She was writing her groundbreaking book, Meghan and Harry, the real story, back in 2019 going into 2020. A friend of hers was present at Bourne Hall on the 14th of January, the day of what should have been one of the most straightforward, joyous, medically routine events in recent royal history. And what this friend observed raised questions that Lady C initially, and this is important, dismissed entirely. She has said publicly that her first reaction was, "This is crazy. This is lunatic stuff." She thought the people on the internet pushing these theories were, in her words, a load of crazies. And then she started paying attention, and she started asking questions, and she started pulling at threads, and what she found was not reassuring. Because here is the thing about Lady Colin Campbell that is critically important to understand. She is not a woman who benefits from being wrong. She is not a gossip columnist throwing mud at the wall. She is an author whose credibility is her currency. She has been through 50 years of litigation against major newspaper companies. She has won the largest award ever given to a litigant in person against an insurance company. She is not careless with her words, and she is not afraid of a courtroom. So when Lady C says that this issue has been simmering behind the scenes for some time, you need to take that seriously. When she says she has raised this privately, officially behind the scenes, those words carry enormous weight. But there is something even more significant that Lady C has put on the record, and I want to make sure you understand this fully, because it forms the legal and constitutional backbone of this entire debate. The constitutional argument. Why this is not just gossip. Let me ask you a direct question, and I want you to genuinely consider it before we move forward. Do you believe a democratic monarchy has the right to demand accountability about who sits in its line of succession? Because that is what this ultimately comes down to. Strip away the celebrity drama. Strip away the Netflix shows and the podcast deals and the Instagram aesthetics. Strip all of that away, and you are left with a fundamental constitutional question about entitlement, legitimacy, and the public's right to know who might one day sit on the throne of a nation. Lady Colin Campbell has laid this out with extraordinary precision. From 1688, following the catastrophic controversy surrounding the birth of James II's son and heir, James, Prince of Wales, who became known as the King across the water, until 1936, all royal births in Britain were required by law to be witnessed by the Home Secretary. The entire reason that law existed was to prevent exactly the kind of doubt and destabilization that had threatened the crown in the 17th century. False rumors about a royal birth had cost James II his throne. Parliament was not going to allow that to happen again. In 1936, after the birth of Princess Alexandra, that specific requirement was relaxed. But, and this is the crucial point, it was relaxed because the underlying principle remained intact. Royal births continued to be witnessed and formally signed off on by reputable, credible, verifiable medical practitioners. That practice has been consistently upheld for every single royal birth in the modern era, including the births of Princess Beatrice and Princess Eugenie's babies in recent years, with one exception. Two exceptions, actually. Archie and Lilibet. According to Lady Colin Campbell, and this has not been credibly refuted, neither birth was witnessed and formally signed off in the way that every other modern royal birth has been. Both births were, in her words, shrouded in secrecy. Now pause here, because I know what some of you are thinking. You are thinking, surely in the age of privacy rights, in the era of GDPR and medical confidentiality, it is perfectly reasonable for a royal couple to choose a more private birth experience. And in ordinary circumstances, you would be absolutely right. Privacy is a legitimate and important value. But here is where Meghan Markle and Prince Harry's situation is categorically different from an ordinary couple's situation. Their children are 6th and 7th in line to the throne of the United Kingdom and 15 other Commonwealth realms. They are not private citizens. Their position in the line of succession is a matter of constitutional, national, and international significance. And it is precisely because of that significance that the historical requirement for transparency around royal births existed in the first place. As Lady C has put it plainly, the monarch has a duty, a constitutional duty, to ensure there is no doubt about the entitlement of any person closely positioned in the line of succession. It does not matter if you are the 57th in line, but it absolutely matters if you are the 5th, 6th, or 7th. And there is a further layer to this that most commentators are not discussing. Even if Meghan Markle did carry the children herself, even if the pregnancy was entirely natural and straightforward, there is still a legal question about egg provenance, because British succession law is clear. If a donor egg was used, even if the child was then carried by Meghan herself, those children would not legally be entitled to a place in the line of succession. The law has not yet been updated to reflect the realities of modern reproductive medicine. So this is not simply a question of surrogacy. It is a broader question about biological origin and legal entitlement. The solution, as Lady C has repeatedly stated, is simple. Embarrassingly simple. Provide the medical documentation. Provide the obstetric records. Provide the irrefutable proof that has been standard procedure for every other royal birth. Put the question to bed once and for all. And yet, and this is the part that should make every one of you deeply uncomfortable, years have passed, and that documentation has not been provided. Why not? Harry's own words, the Frogmore bombshell. Let's talk about something specific, something verifiable, something that Prince Harry himself put into print in his memoir, Spare. Harry wrote with apparent pride that within 2 hours of their son being born, he and Meghan were back at Frogmore Cottage. 2 hours. The palace courtier quoted by Radar Online addressed this directly. Their words, "That raised many eyebrows and questions. How many women give birth and are home in 2 hours? That didn't make sense unless Meghan didn't deliver the child herself." Now, I want to be fair here. I want to be genuinely balanced. There are circumstances in which a 2-hour post-birth discharge could be medically explainable. In rare cases, particularly with very straightforward births in certain birthing suite environments, a shorter observation period might occur. We should not pretend that is impossible. But we also need to be honest about how extraordinarily unusual that timeline is. We need to acknowledge that for most women, particularly first-time mothers, particularly women who have had any kind of complication, particularly in a context where every possible medical precaution would logically be taken for a woman carrying a future member of the royal family, 2 hours from birth to home is, by any clinical standard, almost unheard of. And more than the timeline itself, think about this. Harry included this detail in his book as though it were something to be proud of, as though the speed of their return to Frogmore was a mark of how smoothly everything had gone. He drew attention to it. He flagged it. He made it notable. Which raises the question the courtier is now raising. Why would you highlight something that, on even a moment's reflection, looks so strange? Unless you did not anticipate that anyone would scrutinize it. Unless it did not occur to you, or whoever drafted that passage, that a 2-hour timeline would be the detail that people would zoom in on. The Samantha Markle dimension. This story has another dimension that is now entering the mainstream conversation, and it is one that even many close followers of the Sussex saga have not fully engaged with. Samantha Markle, Meghan's half-sister, who has been consistently and aggressively dismissed by Team Sussex, has given an interview in which she cast doubt on the circumstances of Archie's birth. Radar Online cites her comments as part of the broader context that has pushed this story forward. Now, it would be easy to dismiss Samantha Markle. She is a divisive figure. Her relationship with Meghan is clearly adversarial. And for those reasons, many people have chosen to discount what she says entirely. But here is the question I want to put to you. Does the source of a concern automatically invalidate the concern itself? Because the questions Samantha Markle has raised are not new questions invented by a bitter sibling. They are questions that were already circulating, already being discussed, already troubling people who had no personal grievance with Meghan Markle whatsoever. The questions existed independently of Samantha Markle. Her interview did not create them. It amplified them. And now those same questions are being asked by a palace courtier. That is a significant escalation, because courtiers do not amplify things accidentally. The behavior of the baby bump. Let's address something that has been the most widely discussed visual element of this entire controversy: The baby bump. Footage of Meghan Markle during her pregnancy with Archie circulated extensively on social media, and what struck many observers was what they described as behavior that seemed inconsistent with a normal pregnancy. The shape, the position, the way it appeared to move at certain moments, the way it appeared to change dramatically between public appearances in ways that seemed difficult to explain through normal weight distribution and clothing choices. Now, I want to be responsible here. I want to acknowledge that pregnancy bumps genuinely do look different from woman to woman. Different clothing, different posture, different body types, different stages of pregnancy can all create visual differences that might look strange to an untrained eye. None of us watching a video online are obstetricians. We need to be honest about the limitations of what we can reasonably conclude from photographs. But here is the honest counterpoint. Lady Colin Campbell, a woman who is not given to exaggeration, who has made her living through careful, evidenced journalism and authoritative royal biography, has commented on the baby bump in terms that are impossible to ignore. She has used language that suggests it was not behaving in ways consistent with normal pregnancy. She has pointed to specific moments, specific public appearances, where what was visible seemed fundamentally inconsistent with what should have been visible. And Lady C makes a crucial broader point. Even if the bump was entirely genuine, even if there is a completely innocent explanation for everything that was observed, the question then becomes, why did Meghan behave in ways that drew extraordinary attention to it? Why the dramatic theatrical presentations? Why the poses and the hand placements and the curated moments that seemed designed to showcase the bump while simultaneously provoking questions about it? If the answer is simply that Meghan enjoys attention and drama, which her track record amply supports, then her behavior throughout both pregnancies was breathtakingly irresponsible given the institutional context she was operating in. Because a woman who is carrying a potential heir to multiple thrones does not get to play theatrical games with public perception of her pregnancy. The constitutional stakes are too high. And if the answer is something else, well, that is why this story has not gone away. The attempts to silence. Here is something that has not received nearly enough attention, and it speaks directly to the seriousness of what Lady Colin Campbell has been doing. Someone, and Lady C is very clear about her belief as to who, attempted to discredit her using a fake GoFundMe account. Let me walk you through this because the details matter. A fraudulent GoFundMe account was created in Lady Colin Campbell's name, using her personal details, soliciting donations to be directed to a bank account, crucially, in the name of Thomas Markle, Meghan's estranged father. This, at the exact moment Lady C had been receiving information that there were plans afoot to discredit her. The account was discovered not by Lady C herself, but by Martin Robinson, the chief online reporter for the Daily Mail, one of the most senior and respected investigative journalists in British tabloid media. He found it before she even knew it existed. He contacted her agent to verify it, and that was how Lady C first learned her identity had been used in a fraud scheme. Lady C's assessment of this is unambiguous. She does not believe this was accidental. She does not believe a GoFundMe account can be inadvertently set up in someone's name. She believes this was a deliberate, targeted attempt to associate her name with financial fraud, at the precise moment she was becoming the most prominent public voice questioning the circumstances of the Sussex children's births. Now, think about that for a moment. If the surrogacy question were truly just internet nonsense, if it were the kind of thing that powerful, well-resourced people could simply ignore, why would anyone go to the trouble of setting up a fraudulent GoFundMe to destroy the credibility of the person asking the questions? You do not deploy that kind of operation against someone who is not a threat. You do not risk the legal exposure of identity fraud, and GoFundMe fraud is a criminal matter, to silence someone who is just a noisy irrelevance. The attempt to silence Lady C is, in its own way, one of the most revealing data points in this entire story, because it tells you that someone, somewhere, considered her questions dangerous enough to warrant active illegal suppression, and it did not work. The legal and constitutional demand. So where does this leave us? And more importantly, where does it need to go? Lady Colin Campbell has been extraordinarily precise about what she is demanding. Not speculation, not conspiracy, not persecution. A simple, clean, procedurally standard act of transparency that has been carried out for every other royal birth in the modern era. Provide the medical documentation, have the obstetric records, signed off by the attending physicians and verified by credible practitioners, made available to the appropriate authorities, not necessarily published for the world to read, not necessarily shared with tabloid journalists, but verified through proper institutional channels by people with the authority and credibility to confirm. These children were born of Meghan Markle's body, conceived with Meghan Markle's egg. That is it. That is the entire ask. And there is an important legal dimension that Lady C has been emphatic about. Meghan Markle and Prince Harry do not have an overriding right to privacy in this matter. The privacy of a private individual is an important and protected right, but the privacy of a person whose children occupy the 6th and 7th positions in the line of succession to the British throne and 15 other Commonwealth realms, that privacy is subject to a higher constitutional obligation. The public right to know that the succession is legitimate trumps the personal preference for discretion. This is not a new principle. This is the principle that drove every piece of succession legislation from the late 17th century onwards. The entire system of witnessed royal births, the Home Secretary standing in the room, the formal sign-off procedures existed because Parliament and the Crown had already lived through what happens when there is doubt about a royal birth. It caused a constitutional crisis. It cost a king his throne. It destabilized a nation. The procedures that followed were not bureaucratic box-ticking. They were hard-won institutional safeguards designed to prevent exactly the kind of rumor and doubt that is now, once again, swirling around the British succession. And Lady C is absolutely right that if Harry and Meghan refuse to clear this up, or if the palace refuses to compel them to do so, then Archie and Lilibet should be removed from the line of succession until the matter is resolved, not as punishment, not as persecution, as a straightforward application of constitutional principle. It is worth noting what Lady C has also said about Harry specifically. She has raised the question of whether, if Harry has been complicit in concealing a deception about his children's origins, he himself should be considered for removal from the line of succession. That, she acknowledges, would require an act of Parliament. King Charles would need to make that request, but the legal and constitutional framework exists if it is needed. The question is whether anyone in power has the will to use it. What the palace silence actually means. Now, I want to address something directly, because it is important to be honest with you about the complexity of this situation. There is a reading of this story, a completely reasonable reading, that says, the palace's silence on this matter is simply standard protocol. Buckingham Palace does not comment on private medical matters. It does not respond to internet rumors. It follows a consistent policy of not engaging with speculation about members of the royal family's personal lives. And within that framework, the silence around the surrogacy question is no different from the silence around any other private matter. That is a legitimate point, and anyone following this story seriously needs to hold it. But here is the counter-argument, and it is a powerful one. The palace's standard protocol of non-engagement was designed for a world where the questions being left unanswered were genuinely private matters with no constitutional significance. Questions about relationships, about personal struggles, about private family dynamics, those are legitimately no one's business, and the policy of never explain, never complain, makes sense in that context. This is different. This is not a question about Meghan's personal feelings or Harry's private struggles. This is a question about whether two individuals currently holding positions in the line of succession to the throne are legally and constitutionally entitled to those positions. Lady C has made this point explicitly. This is not about never explain, never complain, she has said. By law, until 1936, every royal birth had to be witnessed by the Home Secretary. The principle that royal births require a form of transparent verification is not a tabloid invention. It is a constitutional legacy, and the fact that the specific legal requirement was relaxed in 1936 does not mean the underlying obligation to transparency has been abolished. So here's the question I want to leave you with. And this is the real question at the heart of all of this. Is the palace's silence on this matter a routine application of standard protocol? Or is it something more uncomfortable, an institutional reluctance to confront a situation that, once confronted, cannot easily be resolved? Because those are two very different things, and the courtier who spoke to Radar Online seems to suggest it is the latter. This crisis won't die down until the irrefutable truth comes out. That is not the language of an institution that believes it is dealing with a simple, baseless rumor. That is the language of an institution that knows, or suspects, that something happened that should not have happened, and is uncertain how to address it. The pattern of behavior. Let's zoom out for a moment. Let's look at the bigger picture. Because what has struck observers of Harry and Meghan's behavior over the past several years is not any single incident in isolation. It is the pattern, the consistent, repeated pattern of behavior that, taken individually, might be explainable, but taken together, builds into something much harder to dismiss. There is the baby bump, the theatrical, inconsistent presentations that drew attention while defying easy explanation. There is the 2-hour timeline from birth to home, the detail that Harry himself included in his memoir as though it were unremarkable, while any obstetric professional would recognize it as extraordinarily unusual. There is the complete absence of the kind of institutional sign-off on the births that has been standard procedure for every other royal birth, including those of Beatrice and Eugenie's children in the same era. There is the cloak and dagger secrecy around both Archie and Lilibet's arrivals, the tight control of information, the limited access, the departures from established protocol. There is the fraudulent GoFundMe account, the apparent attempt to destroy the credibility of the most prominent person asking questions about this. There is the fact that, despite years of questions, despite the growing mainstream profile of the story, despite the constitutional argument being laid out clearly and repeatedly, no documentation has been provided. No formal clarification has been issued, and no legal action has been taken against those making the most serious allegations. That last point deserves emphasis. Lady Colin Campbell has been putting these questions on the record for years. She is not an anonymous blogger. She is a named, prominent, credentialed individual making specific, serious claims about the entitlement of 2 members of the royal family to their position in the line of succession. If those claims were defamatory and false, the legal remedy is clear. Sue. Obtain a retraction. Demonstrate in a court of law that the claims are untrue. Lady C has practically issued an invitation. She has said publicly that she would welcome legal action, that she would love to see Meghan Markle and Harry in a witness box, that she has 50 years of litigation experience and no fear whatsoever of a courtroom. And yet, not a word, not a letter, not the faintest hint of legal proceedings. Ask yourself why. Because people with the resources of the Sussex operation do not stay their hand out of principle. They have demonstrated repeatedly that they are willing to litigate, to threaten, to deploy legal pressure against those they perceive as enemies. They went to court over paparazzi photographs. They went to court over letters. They have lawyers on retainer and a PR machine that has destroyed careers. So why has Lady Colin Campbell, the most prominent, most vocal, most persistent voice raising these specific questions, not received so much as a solicitor's letter? That is a question worth sitting with. What needs to happen next? Let's talk about resolution, because the goal here, at least as Lady Colin Campbell and others have framed it, is not to destroy Harry and Meghan. It is not a witch hunt. It is not an act of malice. The goal is simple, clear, constitutional. Provide the proof. If Meghan Markle gave birth to both of her children, if Archie and Lilibet are her biological children, conceived with her egg and carried in her body, then providing that proof is a matter of administrative simplicity. The obstetric records exist. The medical practitioners who attended the births are real people who can be contacted. A formal, signed verification from credible, qualified medical professionals is not a complicated document to produce. It has been produced for every other royal birth. It can be produced for these. And if it is produced, if clean, verified, Irrefutable documentation is placed before the appropriate authorities, confirming that both children are Meghan's biological children. Then the story ends. The questions are answered. The rumors die. The internet conspiracy theorists lose their ammunition. Archie and Lilibet's place in the line of succession is confirmed and secured. That is a clean, simple, dignified resolution that costs Meghan and Harry nothing, except the admission that they need to be accountable to the same constitutional standard as every other royal family member. If they are unwilling to do that, if they continue to insist on a privacy that the constitutional position of their children simply does not entitle them to, then the questions will continue to grow. The mainstream media coverage will intensify. The courtiers will keep talking. The pressure will keep building. And at some point, Parliament or the Palace will be forced to act, because you cannot have two individuals sitting 6th and 7th in the line of succession to the British throne, whose legitimacy has been questioned consistently and publicly for years, and simply hope the problem goes away. It will not go away. The courtier said so. Lady Colin Campbell has said so. And the logic of constitutional monarchy says so. This is not a question that can be indefinitely deferred. There are moments in history when a story that has been simmering for years suddenly reaches a temperature that cannot be ignored, when it moves from the margins to the mainstream, when it graduates from whispers to formal statements from palace insiders speaking on record. We may be at that moment right now. A high-level palace courtier has spoken. They have used the language of institutional crisis. They have said that this will not die down until the irrefutable truth comes out. They have framed this not as gossip, but as a governance issue, a question about who is legitimately in the line of succession and what proof exists to support that legitimacy. Lady Colin Campbell, who has been telling this story longer and more bravely than almost anyone, has laid out the constitutional framework with extraordinary clarity, the history, the legal precedent, the specific, reasonable, achievable demand. And Prince Harry and Meghan Markle have, to date, provided nothing. No documentation, no formal clarification, no legal response to the most serious allegations. Nothing but silence and the kind of studied indifference that only makes people more suspicious, not less. So let me close by asking you directly the questions that this story demands. Do you believe the public has a right to know that the individuals in the line of succession to the throne are constitutionally entitled to be there? Do you believe that Meghan Markle's right to privacy overrides the constitutional obligation to verify the legitimacy of her children's succession claims? Do you believe that a palace courtier going on record with Radar Online, using the specific phrase cloak and dagger secrecy, represents a genuine shift in the institutional willingness to confront this issue? And perhaps most importantly, do you believe that a story this persistent, this widely discussed, this resistant to the usual tools of celebrity PR suppression can be nothing more than baseless internet conspiracy? Leave your answers in the comments. Tell me where you stand. Tell me what you believe. Because this is a story that belongs not just to the royal commentators and the constitutional lawyers and the palace insiders. It belongs to the public, to every citizen of every nation of which King Charles is monarch. And the public deserves the truth. If you are new here, subscribe and hit the notification bell, because this story is nowhere near over. The courtiers are talking, the pressure is building, and one way or another, the truth is coming. Subscribe for real-time updates as this story develops. Comment below. Should Archie and Lilibet be temporarily removed from the line of succession until proof is provided? Yes or no? Let's hear it.